Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all doing well. Thank you once again for being here, inviting us into your lives for a bit of F1 chat and discussion as we now head to the latest instalment of the Formula One 2023 World Championship in Montreal, Canada. After a small interlude, I am very much looking forward to getting back to the action. As always, we are joined by the DNF1 panel for all of our race reviews and previews. We've got Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington. And of course, don't forget guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And of course, if you're listening to the show on your favorite audio podcasting platform, don't forget to leave us a nice 5-star review. It really, really helps us out. I know we keep going on about this, and I know you guys are probably fed up of me asking for your continuous support, but it really does help us. So if you can, leave us a 5-star review. It really does help us. So thank you very much to everyone that has chosen to support us thus far, and everyone that will continue to do so in the future. Of course, Courtney, let's come to you first. Of course, a big, big week of sport for you. Are you looking forward to F1 returning to the Canadian Grand Prix?
Yeah, I always enjoy the Canadian Grand Prix. It's up there with one of my favourite Grand Prix of the season. But I'm a little bit disappointed. The old technology demons got me again. I was going to segue my intro with the West Ham on massive chant. Got the European success. I think I'm pointing in the right direction. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
I had to put up the flag.
50-50.
It's there. It's there somewhere beyond the sunlight. That's so persistent coming into my room. But yeah, fantastic. What a fantastic week to be a West Ham fan for once. So I thought I was going to segue in with West Ham a massive chant. And yeah, the technology demons are spoiled my fun once again.
Well, I'm sure many of our listeners that aren't necessarily West Ham fans will be grateful that a rendition of West Ham are massive aren't gonna.
I'm grateful.
Yeah, I think myself included, Lee. You know, why not? I think we can skip that part entirely. We'll just say well done, congratulations, and we move on with the F1 stuff. I'm sure many people will be happy for that. Lee, let's come to you. Of course, how are you doing, mate? Are you looking forward to the F1 coming back this weekend?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to it. It's the anomaly of what's normally called the European leg of the season, and it's stick in Canada, which I don't know if the FIA don't really know the geography, or they just
bit concerning, isn't it?
We're just going to put Canada in this part. It's something that's never understood, but I thoroughly enjoy the racing and the circuit. So I'm looking forward to this weekend.
Maybe it's a bit of a cop-out. They might just approach it as the French Grand Prix, or the de facto French Grand Prix for the season in that part of Canada, of course. So, yeah, bon chance to those. Assuming that's right in French, I don't know.
Oh, I bet you butchered it.
I probably haven't. I feel like it's something. It's probably like good luck. I think that's what it means. But anyway, look, that's as far as I go when it comes to French anyway. So let's move swiftly along with that. And I think there's plenty of news topics that we can discuss in this preview, in addition to the predictions that we will do later on in the episode. For those of you unfamiliar with how we do things on the show now, we discuss a lot of the talking points heading into this weekend's Grand Prix, and we give our predictions on specific categories, which we encourage you to join in as well. Let us know in the comments section if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're not watching this on YouTube, get on the YouTube channel after you're done listening to this on your audio platform. Let us know your predictions. We really want to know what you guys think is going to go down this weekend, whether you agree with us or not. Absolutely fine. So, first topic of discussion that we've seen, and there's been a lot of news, it must be said, but I think the most important is the future of Sir Lewis Hamilton. Now, this has been doing the rounds for some time this season. The question has been asked, as Sir Lewis Hamilton's contract is up at the end of the season, will he renew with Mercedes? Will he retire? Will he join another team? There have been rumours about Ferrari potentially approaching that. And for those of you watching this on YouTube, a moment I'm going to leave in. Perfectly appropriate, given what we talked about earlier, but never mind, Colt. Anyway, look, moving along.
Dreams, they fade and die.
For those of you listening to this and not know what we're talking about, just as I was about to introduce the first topic, the flag in the background on Courtney's screen just completely fell to the wayside. So no more West Ham is massive. They've completely filtered out. So never mind, mate. Anyway, Hamilton. Let's talk about him. I'm sure people are much more interested in that. Hamilton's future right now is, at the moment, on a bit of a knife edge. As I said, there have been some contract talks going on. We know that Mercedes and Hamilton are looking to extend and continue. And the first topic of discussion, or the first question, I should say, what are your thoughts on the Toto Wolff interview with CNBC regarding Sir Lewis Hamilton's contract extension? Do you expect Sir Lewis Hamilton to sign a new Mercedes deal? And if so, when? Now, for a bit of context, as we were saying already, we know about the Hamilton rumours. There was an interview that Toto Wolff did recently with CNBC, and it was picked up by Formula.Uno, and you'll be able to see screenshots of what went down or what was said on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. And Toto Wolff had explained that a new contract between Hamilton and Mercedes is now close to being signed, as rumours about negotiations continue into the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. Speaking in an interview with CNBC, Toto Wolff shed some light on the state of his negotiations with Lewis Hamilton. We are still talking, we get this question basically every weekend. We have such a good relationship that we dread the moment we have to talk about money. It's going to happen soon. I think we're talking more days than weeks, but if I commit to a date now, then everyone is due to ask in Montreal on the weekend. Him and me joined in 2013 together. 10 years it's been, and from a professional racing relationship, we've gone to a friendship. It's been a wonderful time. He is the most important personality in the sport. He's so multifaceted, not only the racing, but also off track. We need to keep him in the sport as long as possible. So Courtney, Lee, who wants to go at this one first? Are we surprised to hear that a potential agreement and contract signing between Hamilton and Mercedes is so close? And if I could put the question to you guys, when do you expect an announcement to come?
I think we should make the Lewis Hamilton contract negotiations and rumours. I really think we should make that a part of the year. So obviously, you have New Year's Day and you have Easter, Christmas. I think we should segue in. You're going to have your links with Ferrari around May time. And then you have the contract negotiations in a couple of weeks after that. And then we'll get the announcement. I feel like since we've been doing this podcast, we've been talking through the same things every single year. So they might as well just make it a part of the tradition. But no, I do. I think it will be announced in a couple of weeks' time. It wouldn't surprise me if at the very latest, they left it for the British Grand Prix. But they know that the longer they leave it, the longer the rumours, circulate. And at a time when Mercedes really want to sort of hit the ground running, get back in recovery mode, I think the last thing they want is the rumours and speculation unsettling the team. So I think this is why they're rushing to get the deal done as soon as possible. Yeah,
I think so too. I mean, Lee, based on what Courtney just said, are you surprised that once again, we were here a couple of years ago with Hamilton, will he, won't he? And of course, famously in 2021, after what went down in Abu Dhabi, there were serious concerns that Hamilton had had enough and that he was just going to leave, and that was it. And of course, as it were, he came back with that photo of him, what was it, the Grand Canyon he was standing, saying that he'd been away for a while, but now he's back. Then he signed that new deal, stayed on for a couple of years. Are you surprised that once again we're in the final year of Hamilton's contract and, the questions are coming around and all of a sudden we've got to a point now where it looks like he's going to be staying on perhaps a bit sooner than we had imagined it would be?
I mean, I'm not surprised. You see it with drivers through, at least in recent memory, that they normally retire at certain points. They retire on the high, like Nico, or they retire when they're not enjoying it, or it's that right time, like Sebastian Vettel, Kimi, or you get kicked out. And you it's not your choice. You don't get your donut at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. That's it. You're gone. It's only the people that are retiring, they get their donut. I'm sure it's not like that. You're not supposed to donut at all, according to the rule book, but the drivers still do it.
I really want a donut now, not just the actual car donut. I'm actually hungry for one. So
sorry, but Lewis, obviously, however your thoughts on what happened in 21, he had an impact in his mental state, and he even admitted that, and he had to find that focus. But he's obviously found that hunger again, a driver that's won it all in Formula One. So you could easily go, yeah, I've won it all, but he's decided he wasn't going to walk away, and he wants that 8th title. If he gets the 8th title, it's a different matter. But he's got that fire and that drive again in him again to get that 8th title. So it's not a surprise that the negotiations are ongoing. He's not diminishing, and unfortunately, Sebastian, I'm going to use him as an example, spinning around all the time, or Kimi, like this is just a walk in the park. It's my hobby. Lewis is at it. So this is not a surprise at all that the discussions to extending the contract are ongoing. It's just really the matter of length of that contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, we all remember what Kimi was like. It was just pure vibes for a few seasons until eventually he was done with F1. I suppose what surprised me, I guess, is the timing of this, because look, I expected Sir Lewis Hamilton to stay in Formula One beyond his current contract. I still feel that there is always a desire for him to retain his services in the sport for the next few years, purely and simply because I think he wants to stick around and hope that there is an opportunity to win an 8th world title. I've said this plenty of times already. I genuinely believe if Hamilton had won in 2021 and was an 8-time world champion, that would have been it. He would have finished it then. There's no other reason for him to stick around. And I don't think personally, despite the fact that this is a man that's repeatedly said he's not interested in the records, I just don't see a scenario where he would have stuck around if he'd had won an 8th world title. In a weird sadistic way, I think what happened in Abu Dhabi, as far as Hamilton fans are concerned, obviously it was an atrocity, but at the same time, I think it's what's kept him in the sport. You know, that kind of redemption element to it. And the reason why I think it's a bit of a surprise why the timing of this news report from Toto Wolff, even though we were probably expecting for some time, is there were serious doubts in the last year and a half as to whether or not Mercedes are capable of producing a car good enough for Hamilton to win a world championship again. Because ultimately that's what he wants to do. That's why he's still there. I still think he's driving at a level more than good enough to be a world champion again if he has the car capable of that. I don't think there's any doubt in that in my mind. But of course, there have been concerns over the last year and a half. You know, the back and forth with Hamilton saying that he wasn't listened to regarding this Mercedes car and the concept wasn't working. And Toto Wolff was saying that if he doesn't feel confident being here, perhaps he should look elsewhere if we can't provide a car for him. And it's interesting that now, despite there being a positive relationship between the two, that we felt an agreement would come at some point, that as soon as Mercedes start to show some upturn in form and the car is getting a bit better, this news story comes out. Now, I'm not suggesting Hamilton's waiting around until the car is good again, but I think it's encouraging that what he is starting to see and what Mercedes are starting to produce is better than perhaps what he thought Mercedes would have been capable of a few months ago. And this is a guy that deals with his own contract stuff as well. So he's very much invested with everything that's going on right now. So it does seem like good news. It is rather interesting as a news story that Hamilton's going to stick around for a few more years yet. Could this turn into the fairy tale story he wants? Maybe. But all signs are pointing in the right direction. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah, like, I do believe that if Mercedes were to sort of fall into the pit, sorry, Adam, if they were falling into the pit the way Ferrari have, where they continue to fail year in, year out, I do think Lewis would get bored and leave the sport altogether. I think there's only so much orange smoke the guy can inhale before he has enough and leave. And also, a little bit lighthearted, don't take this too seriously. I think it's also from a financial perspective, it's always good for him to do these yearly contract negotiations because he can ask for a pay rise with the rate of inflation, which we all know was quite astronomical this year. So he'll want to be in line with the rate of inflation. So it's a win-win situation for Lewis. And please don't take that last one too seriously. Jeez, I'll have the mob after me.
Well, I'm sure, a state pension will only take you so far these days. So, yeah, he's got to look after himself, old Lewis, to make sure that he's got enough in the bank to keep him going after he's done with Formula One. But I think you're right. Dealing with these contract situations isn't always easy. He's very much involved in them, so they can take time. I know Ideally, they'd want the drivers to sign a longer contract or, get these things sorted out much sooner than they actually do. But, that's the way things are with F1. But I think it's all good news. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, guys, if you're listening to this on the news regarding Hamilton's contract. Looks like we might get a resolution to that pretty soon. I wouldn't be surprised if we got confirmation at the Canadian Grand Prix weekend that something is signed. But Courtney, as you said, I think the British Grand Prix is probably more realistic. So we'll wait and see. As a segue into our next discussion topic, I think it's quite appropriate to talk continuously about Mercedes as the next point. And as we know, Mercedes showed quite a huge upturn in form with the new upgrades that they introduced at Monaco. They were pretty decent there. They were much more impressive at Barcelona. So will Mercedes continue to be Red Bull's biggest threat in Canada, as it was in Barcelona? Or will Aston Martin and Ferrari be best of the rest in Montreal?
It's going to be intriguing. We all enjoy Barcelona because, the teams bring a raft of upgrades and sometimes we could see a change in the pecking order. But now we're going to Montreal where, we know that Barcelona is like a really sort of classic style track. And Montreal has some street circuit elements to it. It's going to be interesting, not only with Mercedes, but it's also going to be interesting to see how their closer rivals, as you've already mentioned, Ferrari and Aston Martin. It's going to be interesting in the next couple of races to see how these upgrades work on different types of circuits, and then we'll be able to paint a real picture of who is where by the time we get to, British Grand Prix, maybe Hungary. And then we'll get a real sense. We all know that Red Bull is going to run away with it. I wouldn't be surprised if they won every single race this season. I think we've said this many times. But behind that, I still feel there's plenty of intrigue with the Mercedes, Ferrari and Aston Martin battle.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Courtney. I do think it's very intriguing with the Mercedes updates. So obviously, when they introduced it in Monaco, it wasn't ideal. So they went a bit blind into Barcelona. But now they've got the nice testing circuit out the way. They've had a couple of weeks to go through that data. You imagine, remember the gains they made through the weekend in Barcelona? They were nowhere on Friday.
Yeah.
So they dialed it in as they understood the updates. And now they understood the updates a bit more to get to where they were for qualifying and race day. And they've had 2 weeks to go through that information. So I really expect them to be up there. However, there was also, you could argue, could be circuit dependent, but it was also weather dependent. The track was a lot cooler over the weekend than it was on the Friday, which obviously favoured the Mercedes. So it is a lot to see, but you should also mention that there's a percentage of wet qualifying. So that could hinder that. Don't know. It will just make it even more variable.
Yeah, I think so too. And, looking at the upgrades of Mercedes, Ferrari's upgrades as well, and Aston Martin, what they were able to bring, it was a circuit that I was expecting Mercedes to be strong at anyway. We saw this last year. Mercedes was surprisingly much more competitive at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2022. I think at one point, a lot of people thought that this was a turning point for this Mercedes concept and that they were going to go on and win some more Grand Prix and perhaps challenge Red Bull and Ferrari for the top honours on a regular basis. It never really materialised like that. There were moments where they were snapping at heels, and of course Russell's brilliant job at Brazil that weekend, where Hamilton could have easily won that weekend for the same reasons. It never really came to fruition to the level they'd hoped. So I'm not saying that's going to happen again and Mercedes are going to fall back. I just think that whilst I do believe that they're in a much better position than Ferrari are, for example, I don't think we can write off Aston Martin just yet. And at the same time, this was a circuit that very much played more to Mercedes' strengths, a lot of high mid-speed corners. We know the Aston Martin's brilliant at the slower corners. We know the Ferrari is pretty handy at the slower corners as well. We're going to see a lot of that in Canada. So I think if Mercedes are strong in Canada and perhaps Austria as well coming up soon, then I think they're in a great position to establish themselves as the best of the rest. And quite frankly, it's where they deserve to be based on what we've seen this season. Hamilton and Russell equally have been very, very good. They've been very efficient with the equipment they've had available to them, much more than Aston Martin and Ferrari have by contrast, with their drivers at least. So Yeah, things are looking up. Best of the rest, I think, is probably the best we can hope for. I don't expect, unless something crazy happens with Red Bull, that anyone's going to get anywhere near them. I don't want us to get carried away and say, oh, here we go, Mercedes, Red Bull are going to fight again. No, let's be real. Unless something mad happens with Red Bull and Max Verstappen in particular, I can't see anyone stopping them this weekend either. It is what it is right now.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the 2022 point. It's definitely a good point. We all agree that Spain is usually a good track for Mercedes, but I think the difference between last year and this year is, even at Spain last year, the Mercedes was still struggling with the porpoising, the aggressive porpoising, and I feel that was one of the reasons why they really struggled to understand that car. They were more concerned about sorting out the bumpiness rather than raw performance. This year, the car seems to be running a lot more smoothly. So I feel there should be more of an upwards trajectory with that understanding of the car. As Lean mentioned, dialing in should be a lot easier. I don't think they'll reach Red Bull, but I still feel they'll be in a much better position this year to go for P2.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and you're right to point out the porpoising. I think that was a big issue. They just weren't able to run the car as low as they wanted to last season. This year, that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. If anything, one team right now that is trying to run this car low and they just can't do it and it's causing the problems is Ferrari at the moment. And that is quite I mean, it's not a contrast to last year because that's what they were doing last year too. But this year, they're just really struggling with it even more compared to their rivals. So I think that brings us to the next topic of discussion. It was an interesting interview with George Russell, Autosport, I think it was, that put the question to him a couple of weeks ago in Spain, and it surfaced itself this week regarding driving standards. And George Russell had a few interesting bits to say on this. And they asked him the question about driving standards. Does he think that there are drivers that do not drive or give space, I suppose, in the same way as others? Are there some drivers that are aggressive? And George had this to say. He said that we know each other, and probably that does contribute to how we race one another. And that's usually to the drivers in general. And for context as well, I should say this interview was in regards to Max Verstappen, in that the implication was Max is being less aggressive now, or doesn't need to be as aggressive as he used to be because he's in such a dominant car. Just for context, for those of you wondering. But he goes on to say, but equally, when you're battling for a championship, you fight slightly differently. And equally, now Max is probably less aggressive than he's ever been in the past because he's not in a position that he needs to be aggressive. And he can lose a position and he'll know that he'll get it back later down the line. Whereas we're probably in a bit more of a do or die position now to get that one chance of victory throughout a season. Intriguingly, when asked about the importance of trust established with racing fellow F1 drivers, Russell suggested there were maybe 3 drivers on the grid who you wouldn't feel comfortable going against. He went to say, there's trust between most of the drivers, he added. I don't think those 3 unnamed racers have the spatial awareness of others. So, actually, you prefer fighting hard against the great drivers because you know that they're going to be able to control the car better and place it in hard positions, but not dangerous positions comparing with somebody who maybe isn't the same level as the best. So, playing devil's advocate here, guys. Which 3 drivers do we think George Russell was referring to? Who wants to go first on that one and become controversial?
Oh, we all know who probably first.
Let's eliminate the suspicion of who. The question was directed towards what about Max Verstappen, in particular, and his aggressiveness. And I think it's a fair point that Max is less aggressive this year and he doesn't need to be as aggressive. I don't necessarily think that's just because he's got a dominant car. I do think there are other elements that you can attest to Max's becoming more mature and more experienced and not throwing the car in there like he did in 2021 in certain cases against Hamilton, for example. I mean, I think that's the only example I can think of because it was literally them two fighting each other all the time. Compared to how it is now, where obviously you can be a bit more methodical about things and knowing it's okay if you lose a place, you'll get it back later on. The other 2, all right, I'll start it off just to make this easy. I think one driver, perhaps Russell's talking about, possibly Stroll. And I think that not necessarily incidents with him, but remember last season, the incident with Fernando Alonso at COTA? That's probably one example. I know there's probably a few others that I can't really think of right now. and possibly Ocon as well.
Yeah.
I think what happened last time out in Spain, and of course, for those of us that have followed Ocon's career, I know Ocon and Max had the incident in Brazil, which, make your own mind up what you thought of that one in particular. Ocon's previous battles with teammates like Alonso last season, the Alpine, Perez in the Racing Point all that time ago. That's who I think Russell was probably talking about, although I'm not putting words in Russell's mouth here. This is just drivers I'm thinking of. What about you, Courtney?
Yeah, I'm going to say Max Verstappen, Esteban Ocon, and a third choice, I'm going to say Valtteri Bottas, because we've seen a couple of naughty moments between these two. We know there was a whole political sort of flames added to it over the Mercedes seat, but there's been a couple of times. I know that most high-profile incident is Imola, but I've noticed a couple of times that George Russell's got a bit wound up by Valtteri Bottas when there's been a little bit of a dicing on the circuit. So I reckon that he might be throwing a little bit of shade at Valtteri there.
Yeah, maybe. I think there is a bit of irony with this with George Russell, where they asked him this particular question, and he mentioned 3 drivers, because I've picked 3 people that if I was George Russell and who I'd be thinking of, and this is my mind, not George Russell's mind. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. But the ironic thing is, I would probably argue that George belongs in that category as well to a degree. The Bottas incident in Imola a couple of years ago, prime example of that. It took a while, and for Toto Wolff to basically convince George Russell that he was at fault for that incident when they reflected on that. And George wasn't pleased at the time, but I think a lot of us probably felt he was the one to blame. And last season, there were a few incidents, particularly Singapore, I think was one that freshly comes to mind, where he had a bit of a go with Magnussen, I think with Mick Schumacher as well. A few incidents there. So,
The USGP with Carlos Sainz.
Carlos Sainz, yeah.
Oh,
How
yeah.
could I forget that one? Yeah, but this is my point. Like, I totally understand it, but I think it's a little bit ironic. Like, you could probably throw George in that mix as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask this as instead of using the article as a referral, this is what George said, and you asked us name 3 drivers that don't have the spatial awareness and the trust in the other drivers in the grid, George will probably be come up in our conversation. So I do agree with you on that. That's the ironic that has come from George.
Yeah, a little bit. But of course, I think George is like the lead representative for the Grand Prix Drivers Association at the moment, isn't it? So it's probably fair to talk to him about these things, about the, inner driver agreements and stuff like that. But yeah, a little bit ironic there on that one. But interesting to know. Let us know your thoughts, guys. Which drivers do you think George Russell might have been referring to? Be as controversial as you like, but please be respectful. That's all I ask for, if anyone disagrees with you. Let's move on to the next one. And I think this is quite an interesting one, because we just had last week the Le Mans 24-hour race. And as you can imagine, I did not expect my highlight of the season to be Ferrari winning at Le Mans as an F1 fan. But here we are. I'm taking it. It counts as a win. I'm taking that. It's probably the only chance I'm going to get to see Ferrari win this season. So I am claiming that. But what was impressive was that Antonio Giovinazzi was part of that winning team at Ferrari. So congratulations to him and the rest of the Ferrari teams. Great job at Le Mans in the Hypercar Series. The 100th anniversary as well. And last time Ferrari were in that race in the Hypercar 50 years ago, I think it was, they were on pole position as well. So, and I think they won that race as well. So yeah, great stuff to them. But the question is regarding some former F1 drivers. Now, we mentioned Antonio Giovinazzi winning at Le Mans. Marcus Ericsson won the 2022 Indy 500 and led the last lap in this year's Indy 500 race, narrowly missing out for Joseph Newgarden to pip him at the end of that race. But the question is, following Antonio Giovinazzi's Le Mans win for Ferrari and Marcus Ericsson's Indy 500 win in 2022, should F1 teams give drivers more time to shine before releasing them? And I know this is a loaded question because there's been a lot of talk around the futures of Nick de Vries at AlphaTauri. We had the issue with Mick Schumacher last year at Haas, where he was replaced by someone more experienced, and of course Logan Sargent's future as well at Williams. So what are your thoughts on this one, guys? Should F1 drivers be given more time?
This is something I've been thinking about quite well for you even mention this. And I feel that a current driver on the grid is going to push to break the mold when it comes to driving other series. And I think that's going to be Max Verstappen, So I feel that Max Verstappen isn't just a big F1 fan. He's actually a massive motorsport fan in general. He's made it clear that if he feels he gets bored, he'll get bored in F1. He'll try other challenges, and I feel he might not challenge as such, but I feel he'll build, you know, such power within the team that we would imagine he'll be staying at Red Bull for a long time. But I feel we might ask Red Bull if he can like take part in Le Mans, for example, halfway through the season. He'll probably get a resounding no. But I feel that Max could well be one of the first drivers to really break the mold in a very long time.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it just depends on how long he stays in F1 for. You know, he's always talked about trying other things, and maybe he will try other things in the future. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. What are your thoughts, Lee? Should F1 drivers that are struggling be given a bit more time to find themselves and shine in the sport?
I mean, they probably should be given at least a whole season, if not two, just to understand the car and obviously develop and learn. But the problem is obviously it's a high, it's an expensive sport. So there's a lot of money on the line, and it's a business at the end of the day. So you've got to look after your business. And the other problem is we don't have enough teams for those young drivers. You think about even 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago, you had the smaller teams that they were never going to be fighting for the championship. All right, you can argue Haas is never aiming to win a championship. I'm just putting that as an example. They may want to win a championship, but they were never winning a championship. They were there because they enjoyed racing, and they enjoyed teaching these young drivers and bringing into the sport. And we don't have that. It's all now money, money, money. You can't just bring drivers in to the sport. Obviously, you've got AlphaTauri, which is purposely there to bring in young drivers for the big team. But that's an exception. And then you think those two drivers you mentioned, Giovinazzi and Ericsson, obviously drove for Sauber, although it's not a Ferrari young driver team. Obviously it's Alfa Romeo. It's very much been in the recent memory after the BMW days, a young driver team for Ferrari. You think of the Ferrari Academy drivers that went through that team. Obviously, Jules Bianchi. He never drove for the. He was in Manor, but they were eyeing up moving him into Sauber. They didn't make it. Raikkonen obviously won Formula One World Championship, and he was driving for before he joined. But I was going to mention that. And you got Giovinazzi and an Italian winning in Ferrari, and I mean, look, Charles Leclerc can expect to win the championship 57, so 50-year gap. He's got plenty of time.
Yeah, I mean, Charles Leclerc was at Le Mans that weekend. He was watching over the race, and they asked him if he wanted to have a go in the Ferrari hypercar one day at Le Mans, and he's never made it no secret. You know, he's never hidden from the fact that that's what he's wanted to do. I think on the subject of Giovinazzi and Ericsson, I don't feel that their success all of a sudden warrants a discussion where we really have to consider how much time we give F1 drivers before we can actually see if they're good enough or not. I think F1 is so unforgiving, and the conveyor belt of talent is so quick that if you're not on it straight away and you're not ready, you never will be, because you just will not be afforded the time to get ready, with the exception of strange circumstances or exceptional circumstances like perhaps Lance Stroll, for example, who has one of the safest seats in the sports for, we know why. But at the same time, those particular drivers were in Formula One for a reasonable amount of time. Giovinazzi was in the sport for a few years, did okay at Alfa Romeo and Sauber, but we know that he was a better qualifier than he was consistent in the race. That ultimately let him down. Ericsson was a decent driver, but he never had that star quality. He was about on the level as what Romain Grosjean was when he was sort of deteriorating a little bit, and he was better than drivers like Felipe Nasr, for example. Charles Leclerc comes along in his first season and just makes Ericsson look ordinary, but because Leclerc is exceptional, not because Ericsson's rubbish. And then Giovinazzi wins the Le Mans, Ericsson wins the Indy 500, and I think for me, I look at that and I don't look at them and think, F1 should have given them more time or given them a chance. We would have seen them shine now. technically speaking, Giovinazzi has never been fully out of the picture. Ferrari kept him on in a development role, and he's been very valuable to them in that regard. They still have him, and that's why he's in that hypercar. So, Ferrari still see the value there. With Ericsson, I think he just proves that Formula One drivers that go into other series do tend to be successful more often than not. And we can extend the conversation further to other drivers like Sebastian Buemi, who's been a champion at Formula E. He's won multiple Le Mans races. He's arguably one of the most successful drivers in the World Endurance Championship. Fernando Alonso has done stints at Le Mans and won there. He had a go at the Indy 500 a few times. Nearly won on his debut. If it wasn't for liability issues, he probably would have won that race maybe. So, for me, I think it's just a testament to how good you have to be to get into Formula One. And I don't mean this to discredit drivers of other sports who are equally brilliant in what they do, but I think what we're seeing from Giovinazzi and Ericsson is not necessarily a sign that F1 needs to give their drivers more time to shine. I think it's just a fact that in order to get into F1, you have to be exceptional. And to stay in F1, you have to be even more exceptional. So I think in a way, credit where credit's due to a lot of the drivers that are even struggling in F1 now, because relatively speaking, they're still phenomenally good. And I think we have to give them more credit for that rather than say, we should keep hold of them just in case they turn out to be a superstar. If they're going to be a superstar, they're going to be a superstar right now. So
do you add that caveat to Crashdo and Maldonado as well?
Completely, absolutely goated. He was ahead of his time. The compilations just speak for themselves. Have a look on YouTube and just type in Pastor Maldonado compilation. You will not be disappointed. Absolute goated. He dominated the 2012 Spanish Grand Prix ahead of Fernando Alonso in a Ferrari competing for a championship in front of his home crowd in his backyard. Quite frankly, that is goated as it gets. So, let's move on from that one. But let me know your thoughts, guys, on that particular topic. I think we'll talk about one more thing before we move into the predictions, because I'm being mindful of time. Let's talk about Williams. We haven't spoken about Williams for a while. Interesting images surfaced following the Monaco Grand Prix regarding the Williams flaw. Now, to cast your minds back on this one, during the Monaco Grand Prix weekend, we saw a few incidents, one involving Lewis Hamilton, one involving Sergio Perez, where they both crashed out and their cars had to be hoisted onto the crane, as they do in Monaco, which gave everybody and every onlooking photographer a golden opportunity to get some interesting snapshots of the flaws. Now, we know with the modern F1 cars, with ground effect, majority of the downforce is generated from the floor. So we got to see all of the little veins and all the little cuts and slots where all the vortices and all the downforce is being generated and how complex these flaws really are. And then we saw the Williams of, was it Alex Albon? Or I think it was Alex. I think it was Alex. We saw the floor of the Williams and it looked incredibly basic in comparison.
And smooth as a baby's bottom.
Yeah, it really did. I'm going to try and put this on the screen if you can see this, guys, just to show you the comparison. You've got the one floor, you've got the Williams floor, and I think you've got the Red Bull Mercedes one. I can't remember which one. But, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because the floors themselves, we know how important they are in generating downforce in this modern era. And I know a lot of the teams, they do like to take snapshots of different aero parts from every single team to try and learn what works on some cars, try and adapt it to their own. The one area that they struggle to do this with is with the floors, which, is the most significant part in generating downforce. So an opportunity like this is golden. I'm a little bit concerned that Williams probably got a cruel reality check to where they currently stand by looking at their floor and looking at what Red Bull and Mercedes have done by comparison. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an example of, it's what you do with it that counts. And judging by the recent results of Williams, unfortunately, it's damning. They can't even use that line to get them out of hot water. It's interesting. I saw some comments from James Vales today, actually. And he was saying that, some of the facilities at Williams are 20 years behind the front runners. And I think that's just like the reality of where Williams are as a team. Their concepts are as basic as they come. They've got a hell of a lot of catching up to do. And we know how brutally competitive F1 is. So to see that flaw on the Williams, it just shows how much work they've got to do moving forward. If they really want to be a serious, F1 team again.
Yeah, very much so. What do you reckon, Lee? Because for me, I think whilst this is a concern for Williams, I think this is a great opportunity for them to realise what they need to do on their flaws to improve them. And the contrast between Mercedes and Williams is night and day. I mean, with respect to Williams, it almost looks like F1 versus F2 in terms of the complexity of these flaws.
Yeah, I mean, it will be a sharp learning curve in regards to actually they may be thinking the flaw wasn't too bad, and then seeing those flaws, that's painful to see. But you could say, it was terrible, smooth as a baby's bottom, no one's going to copy Williams. But then you came out in Spain, then went for the Spanish Grand Prix, that Adrian Newey copied some flooring edging off the Williams car that caught his eye. So then he's put that into his Red Bull concept. So you can say, the Williams floor is terrible, it doesn't generate downforce. But the goat of Adrian Newey has gone, actually, that little millimeter segment over there is really interesting. I want that piece. So Williams are doing something right because they're called Adrian Newey's eye. They just need to expand it to the whole concept or the floor. But they've got innovation there because that little piece works. So it's just the facilities maybe limiting the funding. Obviously, is improving. I don't know if they're running at the budget cap. To be honest, are they running at the budget cap?
Is that Williams?
I know a lot of the back end of the teams now are running at the budget cap. I don't know if Williams are.
I'd be surprised if they were, but I mean, if they were, I'd be a bit surprised because it's almost like, well, what are you spending your money on? But yeah.
But if they're not running at the budget cap, obviously that's an issue as well. Even if teams like Haas and Alfa Romeo are running at the budget cap, which they've said they are this year. So if they're the only one that's not running at a budget cap, that's going to hurt them a lot in their resourcing as well as coordination facilities. So it's all pieces of the puzzle that still need to come together for Williams.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's a good opportunity for Williams. You know, concern is not necessarily the right way of putting it. But I think when you're at the back, and Williams has made great progress from 2022, we have to give them credit where credit's due on this regard. I think the fact that something as much as the floor complexity, which generates a lot of the downforce, as we've said a few times already, by seeing that, they're going to learn so much from that. And they'll be able to apply those, diagrams and pictures and veins and everything else that comes with a complex floor like the Mercedes or the Red Bull, for example, to their own car. They can make something work out of it. So they've got to put a positive spin out of it, and it's only going to serve them quite well. So, yeah, we'll see how it gets on for them. But, and
they've got plenty of CFD hours to run all the simulations they want.
They certainly do. They certainly do. So, best of luck to them on that one. And that's what we want to see. We want to see the smaller teams close up the gap. So maybe that's the way of doing it. Let's move on to the predictions. So as I said already, guys, if you're familiar with how we do things on the previews, we're now at the part where we give our predictions based on specific categories for this weekend's race. And the first category that we are going to go to is the best surprise. So this is usually reserved for who we think is going to produce the best surprise this weekend. Courtney, let's start with you. Who's producing the best surprise this weekend?
I'm mainly going to mention this name because I don't think he's been getting enough credit this season, and I'm going to say Giovinazzi.
I like it.
I think he's going to continue with this impressive form he's in. He's really getting the best out of a car that doesn't offer a great deal, and I feel he's going to carry that. He's been very consistent this year, and I think he's going to do it again this weekend and get some solid points for the team.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go with Zhou Guanyu as well. I was thinking about this, and I think his form's been very, very good. And, it might be an opportunity to get some points this weekend. I think it's a driver that's been very much under the radar. But right now, he's outperforming his teammate Valtteri Bottas, who's supposed to be going for a bit of a redemption arc after what happened at Mercedes. It's never really happened this season for him. So I think we've got to put it down to, the car's not great, but Zhou is doing a great job regardless. So, yeah, I agree with you. And he got points, didn't he, last time in Spain? So there you go.
He finished ninth.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he was great stuff with him and Yuki Tsunoda in that race. So, yeah, absolutely agree. Lee, let's come to you. Who's your best surprise this weekend?
I'm going to make the Canadian fans happy and say Stroll is going to be the surprise. And I'm going to put context on that. There is a at the moment, on the time of recording, it's a higher chance that it's going to be a wet qualifying. And we know Stroll can be pretty handy in a wet qualifying. It's his home Grand Prix, so I think he's going to be really on it and do a surprise result in qualifying this weekend.
Very interesting. I like the logic of it. Bring the Canadian fans to us. Let's play to their interest. And who knows, it could be a good weekend for Stroll. He was pretty good in Spain. So, yeah, why not? Flop of the weekend. I'm going to come back to you, Lee. Who's your flop of the weekend?
All right, don't hate me, Adam. Charles Leclerc.
Oh.
I don't hate you. I'm just disappointed. I mean, on the subject of Leclerc, because we can get into this a little bit more, and this was a question I was going to bring up, but is Leclerc incredibly unlucky this season, or has he just underperformed, or is it a bit of both? What are your thoughts? Because I'm looking at the stats here. Bahrain, DNF, reliability issues. Jeddah, 10-place grid penalty because of they had to make a change with was it the MGUH, I think it was, or the electronics. Australia, DNF, although to be fair, that was his own fault, being a bit overzealous. Baku, failed to convert the pole into victory, but I think realistically speaking, that was his best weekend of the season by far, finishing on the podium that weekend, and 2 pole positions in the sprint in the main race. Miami, crashed out in qualifying. Monaco, 3-place grid penalty was impeding Norris in the tunnel. Yeah. And Spain, starting from the pit lane, but he went out in Q1 and it was a setup issue because there wasn't any issues with the car from what Ferrari could see. So, you chalk all that up. It's very 2021-esque with Leclerc. There's peaks and troughs, but I personally feel it's a bit of both. I think he's been unlucky, but I also don't think he's been as good as he was last season by comparison.
Yeah, his performance in Spain was interesting. Look, I know he started, further back, but he didn't quite carve his way through the field that, we really expected. And, we know the performance of the midfield cars are closer to the front, but you still think that, Leclerc would have that little bit of stardust to, we've always mentioned that stardust that he has, and it wasn't really on show. We know that Ferrari was really struggling with degradation. But yeah, it was a tad disappointing. He does need to up his game, but I think at the same time he needs to have a couple of smooth weekends in order for that to happen. But whether he gets that's another matter.
Very true. And yeah, I mean, you can put the case to say Charles Leclerc has been unlucky on its own, and I understand that. But my counterpoint would be, well, Carlos Sainz has been having issues too. Leclerc's not the only one struggling right now, and Leclerc's meant to be the guy that has the better feel and the more consistency. But right now, Carlos Sainz is, at the very least, he's the one delivering the points right now. He's being consistent. He hasn't qualified outside the top 5 this season, and his finishing positions have been pretty good too. So I do think you can't just label this all at Ferrari. I think Leclerc has been underperforming. So I totally understand, Lee, why you think he might flop this weekend, as much as I'd hate to admit it.
Yeah, well, I on your question, I do agree with you. I think it's a bit of both. But yeah, Charles is my fault for the weekend. I think he's going to struggle with the upgrades that they brought, getting that perfect setup, and he's going to be behind Carlos the entire weekend.
Someone needs to give the kid a hug and just tell him everything's going to be okay. But
isn't that why they brought Verstappen?
Well, maybe that's what he's going to be doing. And say, it's going to be okay. Here's a Red Bull. Drive that. You might be happy. I don't know. Sorry, Ferrari fans. I mean, I'm one of you, but yeah, it's bleak right now. Courtney, cheer me up. Who's going to be flop of the weekend this weekend? And don't say Leclerc, please.
My one's a bit boring. I don't think it's really going to inspire many people. I'm going to say De Vries. He's generally speaking, it's been disappointing. Like when he had these, he had a couple of practice sessions last season, and when was it Williams that he had to think his Italian Grand Prix, he had a last minute call up, and he did a solid job, and he's already an F2 champion, Formula E champion, and he really hasn't delivered to the levels that most of us expected. And again, I just expect we're going into a part of the season now where trends tend to build up, and I just feel it was going to be another rubbish weekend for him.
Yeah, I mean, he had a decent weekend in Spain. He was much more on the pace, but I think Spain is a circuit he's much more familiar with, so perhaps that explains it. But I suppose we'll see. I mean, Tsunoda was brilliant, so, we'll have to wait and see. My flop of the weekend, Valtteri Bottas. We talked about this already, but I just feel right now there's always something else going wrong. I think he was saying there was damage to the floor after the race, which cost him a few tenths of a second. I'm thinking it's always something.
It's the mullet.
Well, yeah, maybe. Someone said to me the other day, and it's really stuck with me with Bottas at the moment. There seems to be a trend that the funnier and more interesting Bottas becomes on social media, the worse he is getting as a driver. Now, I mean this humorously. I don't mean this seriously. Obviously, I'm not saying Bottas has become mid all of a sudden whilst he's hilarious. But with Ricciardo gone, that mantle of that entertaining social media presence in the F1 world is missing something. It needs that void filled. And for some reason, Bottas has asserted himself into that position, whether he meant to or not, as probably that guy to a degree. But at the same time, it has come to the detriment of his driving. I'm not suggesting the two are linked here, but someone mentioned it to me the other day. And I feel like there is something to it right now. Maybe he needs to go back to having the buzz cut, get rid of the mullet, and then maybe he's going to be great. But to be honest, I think he looks so cool at the moment. I honestly wouldn't really begrudge him of either way.
Maybe he's taking lessons from Kimi about how to be the cool Finn F1 driver.
Laid back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Valtteri needs to evolve in that regard. He hasn't gone quite to I don't give an F status like Kimi just yet. I don't think anyone quite could do that. But yeah, I do worry for Valtteri. I just, for whatever reason, I just think it's hard to get massively invested in what's going on at Alfa Romeo because it's going through a transition. And the likelihood is Valtteri's not going to be there to see the end of it when it fully becomes Audi. And I can totally understand perhaps why he's just going through the motions. I hope I'm wrong. I think F1 is much richer when Valtteri is doing well in the midfield. But yeah, at the moment, Zhou is definitely the shining light in that Alfa Romeo team right now. Pole position. This is something a bit more cheery. Who are we going with for pole position? I'll start off. Max Verstappen.
Max Verstappen.
Snap.
Should we try this again, lads? The race winner this weekend. 3, 2, 1. Max Verstappen.
Max Verstappen.
Oh, we've got to get the timing right on that. We've got plenty more opportunities this season to perfect the timing on this one. So we're going Max to win the race and on pole position. No surprises there. The guy is just absolutely awesome right now. The car is awesome. It's going to take something monumental, I think we can all agree, for that to change at the moment. So we'll move on to the podium. And this way will get interesting. So I'm going to start this one. I'm going to go Hamilton P2, Alonso P3. I think we're going to have an all-champions podium this weekend. Lee, let's go to you.
Yeah, I've got the podium of champions in the exact same order.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Are we 3 for 3?
Again, I'm going to be a bore.
Oh.
I'm going with a Red Bull 1-2. The reason I'm going for a Red Bull 1-2 is we know that Canada is a DRS happy circuit, and that DRS overkill that bugs me so much is going to be in full effect. And I think even if Perez had a dodgy Saturday, he'd just be able to play F1 on easy mode and tail behind Max. And I think that Lewis Hamilton will, surprise, surprise, will end up in third.
It's an interesting one with Perez because whilst I completely agree that that is possible with him, I think what we saw in Spain was a stark reminder that as good as that Red Bull is right now, you still have to drive it pretty well in order to get the most out of it. And I think what surprised a lot of us was the fact that Perez and Russell started quite close to each other in that race, and Russell had Perez beat all hands up in an inferior car. So it does raise the question, can Perez deliver on that? I'm sure he will, but I'm with you, Lee. I like my podium better. I think that looks pretty cool. So I guess
I hope you're right. I hope you guys are right. I really do.
Yeah, well, that's it. Alonso's had 5 podiums out of 6 this season. I'm hoping this isn't a trend where he stops getting on the podium and we've had our fun now. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Moving on to best of the rest. So this category is for the best finisher that isn't driving a Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, or Aston Martin in no particular order. Courtney, let's go to you first.
I'm going to say again, my predictions are really boring this week. I'm saying Esteban Ocon. I feel that Alpine have established themselves as best of the rest. And I feel that Ocon at this stage of the season is getting the better at the car, at the two drivers.
Yeah, I like that. I've gone with Gasly, just to change it up a little bit. I went with Ocon last time out. I'm convinced it's going to be the Alpines, one of the two, and I think Gasly. He was doing a pretty good job recently. I'm just going to go with him, just to flip a coin between the two. Lee, what do you reckon?
To make it a hat trick of Alpine lands, it's Esteban Ocon for me.
Yeah. Well, at least we're different in some regards. But yeah, I'm pretty certain it's going to be one of them two. I was asked the other day, realistically, do I think Alpine could possibly catch Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship? And, Ferrari being the team out of the big four right now that seem to be struggling the most. Alpine making gains as they are. Is it possible? They're not too far behind Alpine. Maybe they could catch Ferrari if Ferrari perhaps prioritise 2024 in the way they did with 2022.
Well, they might start. Ferrari might sort of give away championship position for some more wind tunnel time next season. Might be a strategy.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they come. What was it? 6th in 2021, wasn't it, or 2020? They come 6th.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and they put a lot of that into 2022, and it started off well, but they just couldn't develop as the season went on, or they went down the wrong concept route. So yeah, we'll see. Okay, so final prediction, bold prediction, double points on this one. Nice bold prediction. So, Courtney, I want you to go first on this one. What's your bold prediction for the Canadian Grand Prix this weekend?
I'm going to back my boy Lando Norris again. I'm going to say he's going to get the best out of the car. So I think he'll finish. I think he'll finish in between the Alpine drivers. So I feel he's going to be. So you'll have the top teams that we've already mentioned, then Ocon, followed by Lando Norris.
Interesting. Lee, what's your bold prediction?
Max makes contact with the Wall of Champions.
Well, this was exactly what I was thinking. Not Max Verstappen, but I was going to say one of the 3 world champions on the grid is at some point is going to crash into the Wall of Champions. I mean, would you accept that? It's a bit of a variation on yours, Lee, but mine's a bit more scope for that to happen. So, what do you reckon?
Say Courtney decide because it's very similar to mine.
I'll tell you what, should we both have that then? One of the 3 champions, or would you rather have just Max?
I reckon Max will do it, but it'll happen in a practice session. It'll get the mistake out of the way early. Are we talking about the race itself?
Oh, no, because he's got to win the race. If he crashes, I mean...
I said make contact. I didn't mean it's a DNF or a race-ending
okay
result.
then. All right, so you say Max makes contact with the Wall of Champions.
Okay.
And I think Courtney and I will have to, if it does happen, we'll have to determine how heavy the contact needs to be for it to count.
I'm going to say he's going to have a heavy hit, but he's going to do it in practice. And then he'll just turn on that switch that we all know he has. He'll get the mistake out of the way in practice, and then he'll be unbeatable after that.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't even think Max Verstappen could win a Grand Prix after smashing it into the Wall of Champions.
He'll find a way.
I mean, I know Lewis won a race with 3 wheels, but, relatively speaking, on the last lap, I don't think Max would be able to quite manage the same feat under that kind of circumstance. That would be an achievement in its own right. Although Max has got such an advantage over everyone else right now, he probably could do it on 3 wheels at the moment. Okay, that's fair enough. I will go with any one of those 3 to crash and bin it completely in the Wall of Champions. And Lee, you can just have contact with Max in there. But I think that's all we've got time for, guys, on this one. A lot of content that we covered in that one. And some interesting predictions as well. Let us know your thoughts, guys, on the topics we discussed. And also let us know your predictions as well. As I said already, if you're listening to this show, after you've given us a 5-star review, head over to YouTube. Let us know in the comments your predictions for this weekend. So until then, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.